Israel is continuing with its campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon, with the focus being on trying to degrade not only Hezbollah's capabilities in the south, which is the area close to Israel's border, to be able to allow for the 70,000 or so Israelis who had to evacuate their homes to be able to return home by no longer having a direct Hezbollah threat and presence along the border. But at the same time, what Israel also wants to do is to continue to weaken and I would say almost eviscerate Hezbollah's capabilities in the center of what its command and control apparatus would be. So those are all based in Beirut. It's true that the Americans have asked Israel to hold back and restrain itself from striking in Beirut. This is mostly out of a concern that continued Israeli strikes in the Dahia area, which is a neighborhood of Beirut, predominantly Shia, and where Hezbollah is believed to have most of its bunkers and command and control centers and bases. That if Israel continues to strike there, not only is there going to be potential civilian casualties, but also this will weaken the government of Lebanon. It will weaken the Lebanese armed forces, both entities that the Americans, the French, and the rest of the Western Europe would like to see boosted and emboldened as we move forward in this conflict. They want to see those entities take over Lebanon and free it from the reins of Hezbollah. But I think that what Israel's strategy here is that together with that aim, it is important to continue to weaken Hezbollah to achieve that.
אנחנו נמצאים עכשיו במרפאה האזורית כאן במחנה הפליטים ג'באליה, מבנה ממשלתי שאמור בעצם לקבל חולים. אפשר לראות כאן חדרי קבלה למרפאה. בואו ניכנס נראה במצב הרשמי. טוב, כמו שאפשר לראות כאן, מטען טלוויזיה נגד אדם, מערכות הפעלה חשמליות, תיל דו-גידי, חגורה של מדי חמאס ומחבלים, יש כאן חלקים של נשק נ"מ, אפשר לראות כאן חדר טיפולים למעלה. גם כאן אנחנו מוצאים עוד מוקש שנמצא כאן מוטמן. אפשר עכשיו לראות בעצם מצלמה שמצאנו כאן באיתור הזה. אפשר לראות את הנשקים שהיו להם כאן בתוך המתחם. ממש כאן בחדרים האלה שאנחנו נמצאים כרגע, אפשר לראות אותם מכוונים את נשקם. פה יש רחפן בעצם שאנחנו רואים שהם מפעילים באתר ארכיאולוגי שנמצא פה סמוך. הכל כאן זה ניצול ציני של האוכלוסייה האזרחית בתוך מרפאה, בתוך מתחם אזרחי. אנחנו נרדוף את המחבלים האלה ונמצא אותם בכל פינה.
It was definitely much more prepared for Hezbollah than it was for Hamas. This is the result of a number of elements. Number one, October 7th of last year was a huge surprise for the IDF and for Israel when Hamas broke in across the border and killed 1,200 people, took another 250 hostage, 101 of whom are still being held inside the Gaza Strip. Israel was asleep. It was not prepared for that. It did not have the intelligence in place. It didn't have the capabilities to defend itself in place. What we have to remember is that since that time, Israel's focus has been on the south, has been on Hamas. So it did have a period of time to be able to keep itself focused on the south and build up those capabilities and prepare for a possible war with Hezbollah. The second element is that from an intelligence perspective, we now know after the amazing and remarkable operation with the pagers and the walkie-talkies, the elimination of over several hundred targets of where Hezbollah had stored its PGMs, precision-guided munitions, its cruise missiles that Israel was able to mostly demolish and eliminate, as well as the killing of its top leadership. Almost everyone in that, around that conference table or that board table that would have made up the leadership of Hezbollah have been killed by Israel, shows an amazing intelligence penetration of that organization by Israel, which is not something that happened just in the last year. This is clearly something that has been in place for several years and a capability that Israel has built up over time. And what it shows to a large extent here is that when Israel was focused, when Israel understood the nature of the threat, it was able to allocate the resources and bring amazing results. Unfortunately, with Hamas, Israel was not focused. Israel did not allocate the necessary resources or the intelligence bandwidth. And as a result, we paid the horrific price of what happened on October 7th, but also in the year that has passed since then, which has seen the country embroiled in conflict on 7 different fronts, a sharp decline to its economy. We're now in the Jewish holiday season here in Israel and Jerusalem. This place is usually filled with tourists. The country is empty of tourists right now. And this is just another example, an illustration of why this, or the toll, I would say, sorry, that this war is having on the country. Israel's sense of security has been shattered over this last year. It was definitely shattered on October 7th. The year that has passed, which has seen Israel face great challenges in trying to achieve the results and the aims and objectives of what it wants in this war, which is to see Hamas toppled in Gaza, see Hezbollah removed from the border at the very least, if not more, freeing up Lebanon and freeing it from the clutches of Iran and its proxies. Israel would like to be a safe country, wouldn't want to have missiles and drones fired from Yemen or from Iraq. Just a couple of weeks ago, 2 soldiers killed with a drone attack from Iraq. This week, 4 soldiers killed, 70 others wounded when a drone from Hezbollah crashed into a military base in northern Israel. All of this does still give a sense that our security is not guaranteed, not to mention that if we go back just 2 weeks ago on October 1st, when Iran fired 180 missiles into Israel for the second time that it directly attacked Israel, on that same evening, 2 Palestinian terrorists who came from the West Bank came into Tel Aviv and opened fire and killed 7 Israelis. So the fact is that on the streets of our main cities, we could get killed. In our military bases, we could get killed. On the battlefield, we could get killed. We're under attack from multiple fronts. We're the most attacked country, I would argue, today in the world. And all of this definitely gives a feeling that this country is not yet secure. However, I'll just add that the wars that are being fought now in the North and in the South do give hope that this security reality will change. So while October 7th is definitely a stain on the government and on the army and on the country, the journey we're on now, which is not yet over, does have the potential to alter the security reality for Israel for the better as opposed to for the worse. Definitely the consideration and the concern for Israel here is that an attack by Israel against Iran, which Israeli leaders and officials have said is coming and will happen, will lead to another Iranian retaliation against Israel. Israel needs to be able to defend itself. And I think for that reason, we've seen the decision by the Americans to deploy in Israel a system called the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, which is a missile defense system that is meant to be able to also just give Israel another missile interception capability that can add to the layers of defense that it already has with Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow. This is all because there are concerns, and they're real, that Iran's attacks will continue, whether Israel attacks Iran first or if Iran just once again decides to attack Israel. The thing is, and this is only going to be relevant or for the time that we talk about it, because obviously things change here at such a rapid pace. But there's the famous saying from Hollywood or from a movie that if you're going to shoot, don't talk. And Israel, until now, has often held by that policy. It doesn't say what it's going to do. We've seen what it did in Lebanon. We've seen what it's done in Gaza. But for some reason, in this case, it's been talking a lot about what it plans to do with Iran, but it has yet to actually carry out those threats and make real. I think that there's a number of reasons why. Firstly is the need to coordinate with the Americans. Israel does not want to be seen as interfering in a U.S. election, which is just about 2.5 weeks away. And for example, an attack on oil refineries and the oil industry in Iran could lead to a sharp increase in the price of gas, which is very important for the American voter and would be something that might be seen as gross interference in the election. And Netanyahu, the prime minister here, understands that that would not necessarily be in Israel's benefit, because even if it does see Donald Trump win the election, which he might desire, he still has to deal with President Biden for another several months. And that could be time for retribution from the Biden administration against Israel. So there's a need for coordination. What attacks work? What attacks don't work? Will Israel continue to get the supplies that it will need in the aftermath if a wider war does erupt? And we saw just the other day a letter that Israel received from the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, Blinken and Austin, warning Israel that if more aid does not make its way into Gaza within the next 30 days, they will begin to hold back on certain arms deliveries to Israel. So this is, we're at a very tenuous moment in the U.S.-Israel relationship. And while you could say, no, one has to do with Gaza, one has to do with Iran, you have to look at everything in a holistic way, because one arena impacts the other. So I think there's a lot of need to coordinate. There's a lot of need for Israel to try to, in the best way possible, anticipate what is going to happen next as much as it can, and to be prepared with the right number of munitions and interceptors and missile defense capabilities all in place for that assault that might come in the immediate aftermath of an Israeli strike. I think what we have to recognize that since the beginning of this war, the Biden administration has been very clear on what is important for it and what it needs to be able to continue to supply Israel with what Israel needs. This is not something that was new. I know from the beginning of the war, daily phone calls between the White House and the Prime Minister's office trying to get an exact number. How many trucks went into Gaza this day? How many tons of humanitarian aid were transferred into Gaza? So this is something that the president personally and Secretary Blinken as well have made and stipulated as being very important. Now, there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, this is an administration that, yes, is democratic, is more left-leaning and liberal, and therefore is trying to say to its followers and its voters and its constituents and supporters, while on the one hand, we are giving Israel what it needs to be able to fight this war, except for that one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs that's still being held back, everything else Israel's getting. But at the same time, we are ensuring that Israel is fighting in the most humane and proportional and sparing civilian casualties way possible, and is allowing in humanitarian aid. So this is something that has long been important. By the way, there are U.S. laws on the books that require that for America to be able to supply weaponry to an ally, in this case Israel, it does have to enforce and ensure that that ally is complying with international humanitarian law. So Israel would have to prove that, and the the administration has to consistently prove that to Congress as it continues to ask for authorization for arms sales. So that's also what's kind of underneath the surface. But what you can't ignore is what's happening now in northern Gaza is an area where Israel had operated up until December, pulled out, thought it had cleared it. Hamas reconstituted itself, particularly in this refugee camp called Jabalia in the north. The IDF has gone back in there, and people are not leaving that area, which is what the Israeli military wanted to see happen. Those people are in need of humanitarian aid, and there have been some challenges in getting in the right amount of humanitarian aid into northern Gaza. And the fact that it has been held up has led some people to suspect around the world, even though the IDF and the Prime Minister's office have denied it, that Israel has adopted or is implementing a controversial plan that was put forward by a number of former generals that said, cut Gaza in half, lay siege to the north of Gaza, try to get rid of all the civilians as much as you can to move them down south, and then anyone who's left behind are Hamas fighters or presumed to be Hamas fighters, and those are legitimate targets, and do not let in even an ounce of aid. So this plan, while controversial, and the government says it has not adopted, because of the facts on the ground right now, has led people to suspect that maybe this is actually what is happening. And that is something that the Americans are not happy with. So I think that all in all, you have the issue of the aid in order to supply the weapons. You have the issue of the aid because of the political issues that the Biden administration has back home. But you have one more element to this. And that is the Americans are fed up with this war. And we have to say that they want this war over. They've wanted it over for months. They definitely would like to see it over before the US election, although unlikely that that will happen. And this is just another way for them to express that frustration and get that message across to Israel and the government here that they want to see the war end.